Tonight's topic, why women believe in God. Actually, it's good to see a mix of the genders here tonight. I was wondering whether we'd find any men here apart from me. I'm glad to see there are actually quite a few. So, warm welcome. It's safe. It's fine. Why women believe in God, a fascinating topic. Two fascinating speakers, panelists we have tonight, who will be in conversation with one another. Of course, you guys are a fascinating audience, and hopefully soon to be fascinated as well. And you will get a chance at 8 o'clock, roughly 8 o'clock, there's going to be a question and answer session. So have a think about anything you may want to ask as you're listening this evening. So just by way of a quick introduction from me, why should women believe in God? Because when we look at the major religions, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, they've all been pretty much male-led. Even now, women have been treated as second-rate citizens and marginalised by the major religions, one could say. And also the prophets that started these religions, men as well. So if religion is the representative of God, then what does that say? And on the other side we've got the atheist debate and the scientific debate, and famous people like Richard Dawkins, who wrote the book The God Delusion, quite a strong title. Christopher Hitchens, God is Not Great, again pretty strong title. And yet secularization in the 20th century and onwards has led to a greater equality for women in society in terms of rights and position, but it hasn't led to a decrease in the loss of values, morality, hasn't stopped the increase in violence and peacelessness and stress that we see today. So the question is there another way? Is there a middle ground? And is there a new and exciting role for spirituality now led by women that can make God relevant again to us? And where religion has really failed in doing that and secular society has turned its back on that, is there something new? Is there a new way? And that's what the conversation is going to be probably about this evening. And our two panellists, if I could ask them to come onto the stage and join us, Sister Genty and Liz Hodgkinson. If you give them a round of applause. Just a quick introduction. Liz and Sister Genty have been friends for a long time, should I say, over 30 years, I'll be careful here, and both consider themselves seekers after truth, but have chosen very different life paths, and I think that's one of the things that's going to make tonight's conversation really interesting. Sister Genty has devoted her life since the age of 19 to following the path of Raja Yoga meditation taught by the university, and has really been a spiritual pioneer in spreading the message of peace and spirituality around the world. European Director of the Brahma Kumaris, and helps to coordinate activities in over 100 countries. Liz Hodgkinson, a successful journalist and author, has written on quite a few of the major newspapers, has written over 50 books on often quite controversial subjects, and is often broadcast on radio and TV. And a second career, of course, as a mum, with two sons who are both authors themselves, and should I say no less than 5 grandchildren. So anyway, I think I've probably said enough. So the format, just briefly, Liz is going to start off, and then Sister Genty just giving an overview, their perspective of the topic, and then we'll be engaged in conversation with each other. And then, as I say, 8 o'clock or thereabouts, maybe slightly after, there'll be a chance for you to ask questions. Okay, enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Matthew. One of the reasons we're here is to promote our new book, Why Women Believe in God, which takes the form of a conversation, a dialogue between us, And so I'm setting the agenda, if you like, and asking the questions, and Genti is answering them. So I'm just going to give a little introduction before we go into the question and answers session. Matthew's done most of the job for me, but anyway, just to recap, the first question I'm going to ask is why should women believe in God? And then, what has God and the Holy Trinity, this is for Christians, the Holy Trinity of two he's and an it, ever done for women? I know other religions don't have the Trinity, but after all, I come from Oxford, where the Trinity College and everything's Trinity. I'm sure most people haven't a clue what it means, but anyway. It's a fact that women have been marginalised in every society since recorded history and regarded as second-class citizens. In some societies, women have been regarded as little better than slaves. In ancient Greece, which we consider very, very civilised, ancient civilization, women were literally considered little better than slaves. And for companionship, men had men friends. They just had women friends, or women for reproduction. So why is this? This is what we're asking. What I'm saying, and I'm sure Genti will agree, that this is mainly to do with religion. And it was not until secularization in many parts of the world, which occurred after the Second World War mostly, when women's rights began to be enacted. It wasn't until secularization, after the Second World War, many countries either became secular or the laws were secular, because in the past, most of the secular laws had actually been based on religious laws. Things to do with hygiene and abortion and marriage and childbirth, all sorts of life things had been influenced by religion for centuries. So it was not until that began to disappear from certain sections of society that women began to be accorded equal rights. I think I'm right, Genti, in saying that when Nehru became India's first Prime Minister, he wanted India to be a secular society. And that was, what, 1947, 48? Yes, 47. So this was about the time when secularization began to be widespread. Of course, Russia, another big example. Since 1975, which is not very long ago, less than 40 years ago, which was the first International Year for Women, targets began to be set by the United Nations for women to be accorded equal rights. So targets were set. 1975, that wasn't not very long ago when you think of how long history is. So only a few years ago in relative terms. So at the same time, we're living in a society now where religion has lost its stranglehold and has given, in many instances, has given way to science, which seems to be evidence-based and therefore more rational and logical than religion. And religion is now increasingly seen, particularly by scientists, as superstitious nonsense, which is now being superseded by the evidence and the research which is done by scientists. So if you like, scientists have become the new priestly caste. Ousting the priests who used to be the priestly caste. So all well and good, you might say. All these things can be accounted progress. There are many, many things we have to thank science for. And yet, since science and the scientific method began to be more important in many areas than religion, the world has got into a worse state than ever. Science can tell us how the material world operates, and of course is responsible for many fantastic inventions, but science cannot tell us how to live our lives. And so that's really what we're here for tonight. We're here to talk about what science can give us, what science can't give us, what religion can give us, what religion can't give us, and most importantly, the place of women in all this. So what we're saying, what Genty and myself are saying, is that now, after centuries of being marginalised and considered second-class citizens, it's now up to women to lead the way with a modern type of spirituality which has not got very much to do with old-style, patriarchal, paternalistic religions. Okay, so that is my introduction, and I'm now going to come on to Genty and ask the first question, Genty. Why do you think it is that women have been marginalised in every single religion? We're taught in the Bible, male and female created he them.
One of the things is that for some reason, they've always shown God in a masculine form within the three Abrahamic traditions. Hinduism didn't do that. Hinduism talked about God as mother and father, but yet of course still it was the father that was the dominant aspect, and I mean, you know all the stories of what's happening in India even until today, so I won't go further into that. But that idea of a masculine God was very dominant, and of course then the prophets also being men, and then further down the line the pundits and the priests taking it on themselves, the responsibility of being the upholders of the message and the truth. And so all along the line it was men who were holding position in society.
Why did we lower down the scale, do you think? I mean, just because men held the positions, it wouldn't necessarily mean that women were regarded as lesser beings.
I think in a way that if I look back to a few thousand years ago, when it was physical strength that mattered more than brains, the brawn that brought in energy. I think because men had that physical strength and energy more so than women, I think that this is why they thought that they could manage everything and control everything, and so they did. And women just weren't given that opportunity for a long, long time. And of course, if you look at the role of motherhood, which is beautiful, I have a wonderful mother, but it meant that women were out of action for quite a while, and not just during the period of pregnancy and then childbirth, but also looking after the child. And in a natural way, for the first couple of years anyway, the child's totally dependent on the mother in terms of feeding. But also after that, it then became a natural bond that the mother should be the one responsible more for their care, and the father should be the one.
Even that's, all those things obviously are true, but it wouldn't necessarily answer, because you might consider that those roles, although different, are equal. But yet women have never been treated as equal.
I think it takes enlightenment to be able to see that there can be a difference, but there's equality. And in the conditions of, say, a few thousand years ago, I'm thinking about the period of time when religions began to flourish, and by then there was already disharmony in the world as such. Okay. You know, all the negative forces had already come into existence. And I'm thinking about a time when, now many people will say this is myth or legend, but all traditions speak about a time when there was harmony on the earth, harmony amongst people, harmony between humans and nature, and everything was in a world of order, a state of well-being. But with entropy, that period that I would describe as, say, the Golden Age or the Silver Age, that passed by, and once that was over and strife came into the world, it was physical strength
so
that
might
was important.
is right.
That's how it worked out.
Okay. So, you know, that's just a sort of simple overview, if you like, of how men came to be dominant. But of course it wasn't just in religion that men were dominant. They were dominant in every walk of life, and we'll perhaps come on to that a bit later. But yet, when I was talking to Genti when we were writing this book, Genti was making the point that in most religions, even though women are not accorded an equal role, or maybe even an important role, it's very often the women who have been the upholders of religion and the upholders of spirituality. I mean, we've just got a few simple examples, like the ones who put flowers in church and flowers in shrines. It's women who teach their children, or traditionally, about right and wrong. And in the main, it's women who go to church.
But even here, I was having a look around, and it was open to everyone. But I suppose maybe the title decided who should come, and took a few brave men to make it appearance here. And just look at the gathering, and you'll see that, what is it, 70% women?
Probably. Yes, but I mean, you would agree with that, that even when women have not been given a public role, or in many cases when all their rights disappeared on marriage, and I think still do in many countries, that it's still the women who tend to uphold the religious and spiritual principles.
I'm thinking about, say, women who teach their children to pray. And I know that within a home, traditionally, it would be the woman who would teach the children. And certainly in a Hindu family, it would be the woman who would teach the child simple things like lighting the little candle in front of the images of the idols or whatever. So because women have such a close connection with the child, and I think that it falls on the woman to be, in India they'd say she's the first guru, the first teacher. And so women have been the ones who've instilled faith within children.
So women have gone along with it, even though they've been marginalised in religions, they've gone along with it.
I think there was the awareness that, okay, it's a different role, and it's fine, we're happy with that role. And so I don't think they ever challenged it, and maybe education had a major part to play, in that traditionally women just weren't given that opportunity for education in the same way.
Well, even I can remember when I was at school, very few girls went to university. And when I went to university, 10% of students at Cambridge were female, 90% were male. Now it's the other way around, not the other way around, I think it's 60-40. So again, that's how recent even higher education has been.
In the 60s, so I can actually date it, it was in the 60s that medical schools in London only had 10% places for women.
That's true, yes.
Do you believe it?
Yeah.
It sounds archaic almost.
But it's not that long ago.
It's in my lifetime, certainly.
Yes. So yes, well, one could say that women were denied the opportunity, if you like, of any other life.
Yes, there was only this pattern, and there was no other choice.
There was no other choice.
At least a man had the opportunity to think about different careers, but a woman had no option, no choice.
No option, and that's what's changed, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
That's one of the things that has changed. Now, I'm just going to come on to another subject, because we've got a lot of subjects to cover, and I hope that you will sort of think about the questions you want to ask. So I'm going to have to be fairly superficial, otherwise we're not going to get through them. So, Genti, what do you think that science has given us in the modern world, in our modern age, of value, positive?
Positive value has been all the benefits that we've had through medicine and technology in so many different ways. I'm told that even some of the clothes that we wear today, say for example the fleeces that are so convenient for everyone, well, that technology came about only through the research they were doing for space travel.
Yes.
And so there's things that we have in our world which we take for granted, but it's actually come through very intense scientific research. The other thing, quite apart from all the modern facilities and amenities that science has given us, which we all are grateful for, whether we actually thank scientists or we don't, but we benefit from that. But the other thing is that I appreciate greatly the whole aspect of the scientific method and the rigor of scientific thinking, being able to have that clarity so that then you're moving in a specific direction with your thinking, so it's not fudgy and all over the place. So I think science has brought us a lot of benefit in that way.
So it's not just the inventions, it's also a way of thinking which is less woolly, if you like, than...
One would say
well, at least that's the intention.
Yeah, one would say that the rational, logical thinking and the development of the left brain,
yes,
and I've been very specific here, yes. So the development of the left brain has been through education, modern education, and through the scientific method.
Yes, okay. So we're talking about the good side of science, and as we've said, the benefits are many and really can't be argued with, even down to something as simple as a washing machine. Think of the difference between washing by hand and, you know, and they're all relatively recent inventions.
And it was a huge liberation for women,
yes,
to have washing machines.
Exactly. So, you know, we've got a lot to thank science for. Oil and electricity as well, has made these things possible. Okay, so what do you think that science and the scientific method can't give us?
I would say, and there are others in this room who might think differently, but I think that science by definition is the exploration of the physical universe and the laws that govern the physical universe. And so it's brilliant because it's actually defining its own limits and how far it can go. And I would say that there's another whole dimension which is beyond the physical. And if science by definition is an exploration of the physical universe, the natural universe in that way, then the things that are beyond that, even though I have to add that science is gradually moving to that point of absolutely the edge of exploring what is consciousness and being able to tell us about a little bit about that energy which is beyond measurement. But otherwise science will measure everything. And yet the other energy that exists, the spiritual energy, the energy of spirit, of the soul, how can science give me evidence of that or proof of that? It's difficult.
Well, I think what they've done with that is to deny the existence of the soul or anything beyond the material. I mean, what a lot of evolutionists say is that everything stems from the physical.
You know, things like love and joy and peace, what some people describe as the positive emotions and other people would describe as the innate values of the spirit. How do you measure these things, and how can you find them in any aspect of the physical form? And yes, I know that people say everything's in the brain and everything is an epiphenomenon of the brain and things like this. But in fact, people who believe would say that the evidence of the spiritual dimension is through our own experience.
Well, we've got all the great poets, artists, musicians. Where did their inspiration come from? Because presumably, you know, if there is nothing beyond the physical, we'd all be much more equally gifted. Anyway, that's another topic.
I just want to say one more thing here. You know, the musicians and the artists, etc. early days, and they would feel that it was coming from up above.
Yes.
And they wouldn't even want to sign their name to something. And they would say it was coming from that energy above.
It was coming through them, not from them.
But also, equally, if you think about people like Archimedes or Einstein or even Newton, special flashes of inspiration have come when the mind is very quiet and relaxed. So Archimedes sitting in his bathtub. So a moment of quiet, a moment of relaxation. Newton sitting under the apple tree, and click, there's something powerful that happens. So my point is that when there's a period in which the mind is quiet and is silent, there's an opportunity for an inspiration from above to touch them. And then maybe the scientist doesn't actually acknowledge that it's come from outside, but just looking at all the circumstantial anecdotes that we hear about these things, it seems to indicate that that state of quiet allows another creative expression to emerge. And maybe even just thinking about the right side of the brain and how that's able to function, and where that's functioning and there's a creative impulse that comes through the power of silence, then many new things can develop.
That's true, but there's also a saying that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, which means, if you translate it, which means that yes, there are flashes of inspiration, but all the great scientists that you've mentioned, they all had an incredible level of concentration as well.
Well, that to me is saying that they learned about focusing their mind.
Yeah.
So as soon as you use the word concentration, who's concentrating? How do you concentrate? And this is what meditation teaches us, the ability to be able to focus our mind.
Okay.
And so then it's not just one in a million, but it can be many, many, many of us
that is
can do
something
this.
that, yes, that is something we go into in the book, that these gifts are actually open to a lot more people than is realised. They're not just part of the elite and for the few. So, yeah, we're democratic. Okay, so I just want to ask a final question on science, Jenti, and that is, do you think that science and religion will always be in conflict?
No, I think that science is actually moving to that point where they're able now to touch those very subtle energies, and also able to, they can't measure the soul, but they can measure the impact that the soul is having in many different ways. And so...
What you mean on an instrument?
Yeah. Physical instrument.
On a physical instrument.
And so I think that because of this, science is actually moving towards bringing the point where people begin to understand that there are other energies beyond just the physical.
Would you say this is a small group of people or a fairly large group?
No, at the moment it's a small enlightened group that's working in that direction, so it's not even mainstream science.
It's not in the mainstream?
Not yet, but I think it'll get there.
Okay. Earlier I spoke about secularization, which largely occurred after the Second World War in most parts of the world, and where religious laws or laws based on religion began to give way to purely secular laws. And so I'm now, so we're now talking about a time after about 1945-ish. So the next question I want to ask you, Jenti, is do you think that secularization, which has largely happened since the Second World War, is also responsible for the greed, savagery, violence, drug taking, all the things that we consider evil or wrong in the world today?
I think secularization has meant that the teaching of spiritual things, religious things, has been set aside, and specifically in India, now they're beginning to question the value of secularization.
Oh, are they?
In the sense of education.
Okay.
Still,
so are the schools, all the schools in India secular?
Yes, they're supposed to be. All
yes.
the government schools. I think there might be some other religious schools around, but generally, but you can say, for example, we have lots of convent schools there, but yet it's not. It's one subject within everything else, the subject of religion. But I know that there was this debate going on a little while ago in India about bringing back educational values and how to be able to do this, because certainly we can see the loss of values happening through secularization. I would also say that lack of faith has actually created a situation in which there's less self-esteem. This is a very deep connection that researchers have been able to discover, because generally a problem is lack of self-esteem, and this is universal. And they found that in homes where there is faith, and faith is being practiced, then the level of self-esteem of the child is likely to be higher. Okay. And of course then lack of self-esteem leads to many other problems. And we can talk about that later separately, but faith is very much a factor there. And I think that where you don't have guidelines that religion has given us in terms of human behavior, then it gives that margin in which violence becomes acceptable, or greed becomes very, very extravagant, as it is in today's world. It becomes rampant. And so religion has been a restraining force or restraining principle to a certain extent. And some would say it's been too much of a constraint, but yet still there was a sort of boundary that people would follow. And today it feels as if all those boundaries have disappeared.
And yet, one has to admit that there's always been wars, cruelty, torture. That's nothing new. What do you think is actually new about the irreligious world of today?
I think the way it's now a universal story, whereas maybe early days we would say that it was specific individuals who were involved in bad things like torture and violence, etc. Now it seems to be rampant. Now it seems to be just across the board, everywhere, all over.
When I was researching this book, one of the things that came to light was that in Renaissance Italy, the time of the Medicis, I mean, they were very, very wicked, but and they were big bankers, as you know, but they thought quite literally that if they didn't repent on their deathbeds and give money to charity or to good causes, they would go to hell. And so that's where you get the Sistine Chapel, and because yes, they were very wicked and they did terrible things, but they all repented on their deathbeds because they thought they would go to hell if they didn't. But sometimes they might have repented before their deathbeds, but because they so strongly believed that they would go to hell. And then in the 19th century, most of the banks, certainly in the UK, the big banks, Barclays, Coutts, and so on, were started by Quakers. And one of the reasons that Quakers started banks is because they were excluded from the professions. But they did the same thing. They established schools, hospitals, all sorts of philanthropy, and you see nowadays a lot of Friends schools called Friends schools. They're the Quaker schools. They were originally Quaker schools, but now, and they thought, I don't know whether they thought they'd go to hell, but they thought it was their duty, at least, to give back what they had made. But now that's gone, hasn't it? That concept that bankers or people who are very, very rich must give back to society, that concept is largely, would you say? I mean, you've got Bill Gates and his charity.
Well, he's a shining exception to the rule.
You think he's a shining exception, do you?
I think so.
Yeah.
I don't think there are many like Bill Gates around. And I know that in India they try to, on the one side you see ordinary people engaged in some sort of donation and charity, and 10% income going to charity in that way. But when you come up to the really wealthy top-level people, there just isn't that same philanthropic attitude that there used to be. No. And so there was a whole movement in India trying to encourage the Bill Gates syndrome and to encourage people to move in that direction.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he has become a shining exception.
So, I mean, would you say that's one example, if you like, where the loss of religion, the loss of values has meant that people are not giving back in the same way that maybe they would have felt was their duty at one time?
I think that when there's faith and that awareness of God and the world as my family, there's a greater spirit of generosity and giving. And definitely I think that a lot of the troubles of the world have come about because of loss of faith in God and loss of awareness of one human family. And so faith brings back that awareness and a different quality of interaction with each other.
So what would you say are the main differences between religion and spirituality?
What's happened with religion today is that it tends to focus on the externals.
The ritual.
The study of the scriptures, the going to a place of worship, and so external rituals in that way. And I'm sure that within that some people do it absolutely in the right spirit, but not everyone, I suppose. And more important is the going to church rather than having the experience of a relationship with the divine. And so,
which you don't have to go to church to experience that, do you?
Right, but there's an inner strand to every religion, which is the esoteric strand, the mystical experience. And in fact, all the traditions come together in that spiritual experience, the mystical experience of the divine. And so when you hear Sufis or monks or mystics of Christianity, or the sadhus, the very deep yogis of India, when they speak of their experience, it's very, very similar. And so I would say that spirituality actually brings people together to a state of awareness and understanding of the Creator, which on the level of religion and tradition, be quite separate. But on the level of spirituality, you're very close together. And the other thing that spirituality teaches or makes us aware of, and it happens by going on the inner journey, the inner track of religion. So it's not a question of changing your religion or anything, but when you go on that inner track of your religion, you come to that awareness of spirituality. And so the second thing that happens is you become aware of the universal values, which are the values of every human spirit. And that again becomes a tremendous connection between all people, because you realize
rather than separating.
Yeah, you realize that my values and your values and those of any other tradition are actually the same.
So the next question, which is, I suppose, at the heart of what we've been writing about, and at the heart of why you're here tonight, whether you realise it or not, is why must women now lead the way? And before I ask Jenty to answer that question, there are two things that that I wanted to draw your attention to. One is in the Church of England, this issue of women bishops, which one might have thought was something quite minor, considering not many people go to church these days, and certainly in the UK, Christianity is now only one of many religions and faiths followed, and yet it's caused the most enormous worldwide media storm and discussion among so many people. It's sort of out of all proportion to what one would have considered to be its importance. so maybe there's a symbolic thing there. I also wanted to read out something from the liberal Jewish synagogue of Hampstead, where it says here, they're talking about bar mitzvahs, and it says here, progressive synagogues affirm the absolute equality of boys and girls. Now that must be relatively new, I would think.
Especially to put it into print.
And it's in print, exactly. So just these two things, one, the big issue of, very big to almost worldwide issue of women bishops, and secondly, the liberal Jewish synagogue, which has affirmed in its newsletter the absolute equality of boys and girls. Now that would not have happened possibly even 10 years ago, would it?
No, I don't think so.
So, these are just two examples of where women are becoming equal or becoming regarded as equal. So do you think that these are steps on the way, Genty, for women actually leading the way?
Definitely, it's very good signs. And I don't know that many women want to become priests or bishops, but it's wonderful that the door is now open for them if this is their choice. And so it's wonderful that choice is now available to women.
I think the issue of women bishops goes wider, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's something that's been traditionally men only.
Yeah.
Now I'm told there are more at the lower level, or entry level, shall we say, there are now more women vicars than men vicars. And I'm also told in the liberal Jewish synagogues there are now very many women rabbis, but again I think at sort of entry level.
Yeah.
But even, say, 10 years ago there wouldn't have been that, would there?
I think the doors were just beginning to open 10 years ago, but 20 years ago probably nothing. So it is recent. But yes, definitely, I think these are signs of women beginning to lead the way. But in terms of actually leading the way, I think what women have to offer are the feminine attributes. And I think it's possible for men to have those feminine attributes too. But I think more and more there's acknowledgement that the feminine attributes such as compassion and love and peace, traditionally these have been called the feminine attributes. So it's these qualities that are very much needed in the way. And so women can show the way, but also men with these qualities can also show the way.
So what we're saying really is that what we need to lead with is the feminine principle at this time in our society.
Right.
Am I correct?
Yes, because what is needed very much is compassion, and in order to replace the violence that's happening, what is very much needed is an attitude of peace and harmony. And so love, these are the things that are very much needed.
Would you say that women of today are guilty of embracing the masculine principle?
I think that was absolutely true in the 80s.
Right, yes.
And I think in the 21st century it's beginning to change a little again, and women are beginning to appreciate the feminine principles in their own lives and in their own being. But certainly through the 80s and then maybe even the 90s, you see why this happened is because women could only make their way through the glass ceiling or even the glass door to enter was if they were more masculine than men. And so if they had a stronger competitive streak, if they were able to be brighter and cleverer than men, then they were able to make the grade. And so to come to a certain level of equality with men, they had to use the masculine traits in a very strong way. But I think that now the doors are open, it's not as rampant as it was then. And so women are now beginning to appreciate their own feminine principles too. If we're going to embrace the feminine principle, I'm talking about women now, we don't want to go backwards. We don't want to go back to a situation of inequality or lack of education as we're seeing in some fundamentalist countries. Right.
and women don't want to go backwards, and I think this, may be a major factor. Then, militant atheism is something of a boys' club anyway, isn't it? It's mainly the men who are militant atheists. So what I want to ask Genti is, embracing the feminine principle, okay, perhaps women are more naturally spiritual than men, something we've touched on. So how can we go forward, taking our place in the world as leaders and not followers, leading the way with confidence and self-esteem? Where do we start?
I know that for myself it's been spirituality that made me aware of my own identity as spirit rather than just female or woman. And I think for men and women to come to that awareness of spirit creates a huge self-esteem that had become lost just in the awareness of the physical form and the gender issue. And so coming back to that awareness of who I am, and this is true for all, but especially for women, because culturally and socially they've been denied so much, and so their self-esteem is really very, very low.
Well, I mean, it wasn't until fairly recently that women were allowed to exist in their own right. And it's still the case that women, well, I mean, it used to be, women used to lose all their rights on marriage. But even now, women are still calling themselves Mrs. Well, you don't get a man changing his title on, even. I'm saying we haven't got there. I mean, people say, oh, this isn't important, but they're symbolic, aren't they?
The external manifestations of a deeper reality.
It's got to be, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And in the times where they announce engagements, it's always the man first. Again, I mean, a lot of people think these things are not important. They say, well, they're trivial. But as you say, they underlie, don't they, and underline a deeper truth.
In India, a woman's first name changes also.
Yes, but not a man's. It's only one way.
Again, definitely one way.
So, we've still got quite a long way to go, because women are still, even when they don't have to, they're still subsuming themselves into a man's identity.
Well, this is where spirituality really is the way forward.
Okay.
Because when there's a spiritual consciousness of who I am, and that awareness of the highest qualities within the self, then you're not looking at who I am in the context of another person, but you're looking at yourself and that which is there within you as your own natural qualities within your own inner being.
So what we're saying, you see, a lot of people think that if you're going to be spiritual, you're going to be like a kind of dippy hippie, and you're not going to be high achieving. What you're saying is actually the opposite.
And in recent times, more and more people have come to understand that meditation, silence, mindfulness, different names given to it, but these things will allow the highest potential of the self to emerge, and this is for men and women.
Yes, of course.
It's for each one. Yes. And so yes, I think there's a greater acknowledgement of this now, and certainly in terms of business, spiritual intelligence is a subject that people now begin to talk about.
Okay, interesting.
This again came just about 15 years ago. First it was talking about the rational intelligence, yes. Then it was talking about emotional intelligence, and so people became more important than just the aspect of the logistics.
Yes.
But now they're talking about spiritual intelligence.
Yes.
Yeah? And so, what is spiritual intelligence? It's the awareness of the spirit and the being within, and all of this.
Can we get there? Or, can women get to a position of leadership, and can we become truly equal and move towards a better world without meditation and spirituality?
I haven't seen it.
Right.
Maybe possible hiding somewhere. but certainly within spirituality, I've seen that the leaders of this organization, women, and one particular woman who you met actually, Dadi Prakashmani, she headed our organization all the way from 1969 through to 2007, and so that was a span of decades, many decades. And within that period, she actually demonstrated how it was possible to be such a wonderful leader that under her guidance, our activities grew from being just in India to across the world, in, at that time, probably about 120 countries under her leadership. And one of the hallmarks of her leadership was collaboration. And what she did was not just say, you know, now this is what I say and this is what you have to do.
Not autocratic.
Correct. And what she did was to create a spirit of cooperation with those who were her equals. Because when she did become the leader, there was a whole group of others who were her equals, and that there was something very special about her, of course. But she worked collaboratively with them so that she engaged them in the decision making.
Do you think she was only able to do that because of spirituality?
You see, when you work in collaboration, it means letting go of the ego.
Okay.
And so the killing of the ego, I don't think it can happen any other way. It's only through the awareness of being spirit and through that being able to let go of ego. So this is why I see that it's only through that collaboration, cooperation can replace the competition that exists in the world today.
I can see Matthew's got his microphone in his hand. So I'm just going to, just one last question, if I may, Matthew, which is something very important, save the best until last. What will change when women lead the way? I was saying over the past 20 years or so, there's been great emphasis on targets, on ever more aggressive business models. And outcomes. You know, you hear all these words in business. What do you think will change when women take their rightful place and become in charge rather than followers?
What's happening through spirituality, because I see that that's the way forward, is that although women are leading, but yet they also have that spirit and generosity in which women are given their equal rights also, so that it's not a new type of domination after the male domination. Now you have female domination.
Yes.
But they're able to work together with men so that then there's cooperation on that level also. And so I see that the perfect situation is where you have the masculine qualities and the feminine qualities together, and men and women working as equals. And so women leading the way has meant that within our organization there are men who hold very responsible senior positions, but are able to work with them in harmony with them. But also that in this particular way, yes, the ego is set aside and is killed, but also things become people-centered rather than target-centered.
Yes.
And when people are given value and dignity and importance, then of course they give of their best, not only to another human being, but they give their best to whatever task it is they're engaged in. And so I see that that becomes a major shift.
What was that line in the hymn, make drudgery divine? Okay, so we'll stop there, so we've got time for questions from the floor. Okay, thank you, Matthew.
Anyway, just to say again, thank you so much, wonderful points. A couple of things I'd like to bring up. Actually, I got a bit depressed, to be really honest with you, because it just made me realise just how far we've got to go. Your point is about the bishops and the liberal Jews. Two things. First of all, the bishops, as we know, women bishops just got voted out by Synod, so it didn't happen. And I was brought up as a liberal Jew, and a liberal Jew are not the same as the conservative Jews, the Orthodox. And when I was 40, 50 years ago, I don't know, 12 or so, I was equal then with the young men in my synagogue, and it was exceptional then. It's not a new thing. that the girls and boys were treated equally. There are more female rabbis, that's true, but in the Orthodox Jewish,
that's not true.
Well, it's not true. And the chief rabbi is not in favour at all of women moving into power. So my point is, we are so far behind in classic religions, which is why I've always been so attracted to the Brahma Kumaris, of course, as the only women's-led spiritual organisation. And I've heard many times, of course, from you, Sister Janti, and from Daddy Janki about, you know, we are souls. It's not a gender situation, but the reality is that this organisation was set up by its founder to encourage young women in India all those years ago to become leaders. So there was a gender situation. He didn't set it up for young women and men to become leaders. He was very specific that, I'm sorry to call it this, but you know, it's the truth. And okay, we know we're all souls and we're gender free and we've been many lifetimes and we different genders, but the fact is, it is led by women, and it is an inspiration to me constantly to see women's leadership, which I don't see in the secular world or the religious world or the spiritual world, anywhere else like I see it here. Whereas you rightly say men are encouraged very much so to move into their power, but with women holding out their hand. And if we could put that into the real world, we might have some, the real world, this is the real world, but you know what I mean, outside, we might have something we can work on. But the last thing I'm going to say is, I've just come from facilitating a women's business network event this afternoon, where they were women who were all trying to work from their heart, be in business, but to give back and to help others. And all of them admitted to be struggling financially. So that's the thing. Yes, we all want to help, we all want to be together and collaborate, but we're in a world where the system doesn't actually support that. So, I mean, I just feel a bit sad, but I know we're going to get there.
Well, I mean, I agree with everything you say, Lynn, because, you know, that's the reality. All I was saying about the bishops, the women bishops, and what I read, I mean, I don't know much about the liberal Jewish synagogue, but it's just that this is actually written down rather than, do you know what I mean? Yeah. And it seems that there is a bit of movement, at least, towards women being acknowledged as people in their own right.
And what I'd like to say to Lynn is that maybe even these women may be struggling, but yet it's not going to be through aggression and competition that you're going to move forward. And so when they get in touch with themselves and their own spiritual power and highest potential, then I think they can be successful. So I don't think that the answer is just to teach them how to be out there in that world, but to allow them to deepen their own spiritual understanding and capacity.
On the other hand, Jenny, Lynn's got a very, very, very valid point when she says they're all struggling financially.
So I think that, you know, if they think that it's going to be by being aggressive
no,
by being competitive.
These were spiritual women.
Okay.
And they were all up at the point. They were coming from their heart, and they were therefore struggling out there in the financial world.
Can I make a point? I think I'm the youngest here. Okay, I've never ever felt that I'm not equal with a man. Like, for me, it was always, I felt that I'm in the same level, that I'm earning the same money. That's why I think it's changing. It's definitely changing.
How old are
But
you?
if 25, but if inside we will feel that we are equal, we will be equal. Sometimes women makes them unequal because they feel this way. And I felt that I'm equal all my life. And I had a big self-confidence about myself. And that's why I think men looked at me at the same level. I finished law. Imagine to go to the law university, and my professors at the beginning, they would think, oh, it's a girl. But then I just needed to stand up, to start talking, and everything would change. That's why I really believe if we want to change something, we need to change from ourselves. And when we inside feel that we are equal, we will become equal.
So definitely that
agree with everything you say. I just hope you're carrying that throughout your life, because often, as women get older, they do start to lose a lot of that confidence.
Thank you for your sharing, it was really wonderful. One of the things that kept coming back to me, your examples through history about women and how they felt about themselves and how they've been treated by church leaders, etc., is the fact that one of the greatest gifts I think women have, they have a nurturing spirit. And I think that nurturing, and I think that doesn't mean to say that they're less strong than a man, or a man, we know nowadays, getting in touch with his feelings, but I think what's happened a lot to cause the upset in the world that we have is the loss of family values. And because women wanted to be equal to men, they left the home and they went out into the workplace. And I think that nurturing spirit somehow has gone astray. And I think if women felt confident in themselves, and really, as Sister said, got in touch with themselves, that nurturing spirit, it's so powerful, and it could cause ripples and touch everyone, men included.
One of the things that Lynn mentioned was that right at the outset, the founder of the organisation, it was a conscious decision by the founder that it should be young women, well, it was women generally, but specifically young women, who would be given training as the teachers and the leaders of the organisation. And on one side it was affirmative action, the first of its type, to be able to restore that inequality and balance it. But on the other side, it was also seeing this very quality of nurture and understanding that in order to have spiritual development, it would be a lot of nurture and sustenance that would be required, and women would be able to do that. They'd be able to nurture others and help them along the spiritual path.
I'm one of the few men speaking tonight, but I did grow up in a male-dominated society, and I've just been observing stuff. I'd just like to comment that the reason why I feel women have an affinity to God is because naturally, as women who have learned from their mothers or been mothers themselves, those qualities naturally emerge and they sort of get passed down the line. That's why I feel that women seem to have a stronger affinity to God. And really, I mean, what I'm driving at is that I think that women should really not judge themselves by what they're achieving externally, but actually the contribution they're making to society with these qualities, and they really ought to celebrate the fact, the old saying that, you know, God could not be everywhere, therefore he created mothers. So I think really it's really time to look at that rather than just assessing yourselves by what's been, you know, how far you've come in society, or sort of weighing yourself up against what men are achieving, because both have different qualities.
Before you come back on that, I think this lady deserves to ask a question as well. So we can handle them both at the same time.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, just in reference to, sorry, I don't know your name, but the woman who was talking about women's studies and things, and business women, because I'm an artist and I'm also, I suppose, a bit of a businesswoman, and I've been brought up, raised Hindu, but in the UK. When I was younger, I used to feel, yeah, you know, there's a lot of equality. As I've gotten older, I've seen the differences, you know, outside in the world. But I do think that, you know, I really felt with what this lady here was saying about if you feel equal, you're treated equal. And there's and what I've seen is with a lot of female business people, artists, sometimes you just don't see yourself as equal because of your own experiences in life, and then that comes about. And the beautiful work that happens here is you can see so much self-transformation happen within a short period of time, and things just start changing. They say in life that your inner world equals your outer world, and I really resonate with that. And you know, you could be a nurturer, you could be aggressive, you can be competitive or whatever, but at the end of the day, if you feel good about what you do in life and you're out there doing your thing, I think that's the most important thing. And it's not about external things, you know, it's not about money mean it's not about achievement, it's about being true to yourself, really. You know, and recognising that we're all souls, and actually souls are genderless, if you think about it. Thanks.
But two other things that I specifically want to say. One is that in Rio last year, in the month of June, at Rio +20, I was in a particular event organised at the UN, in which it was about 20 women who were either currently presidents or prime ministers, and some who were former presidents and prime ministers. And certainly out of that group, there were a few women who seemed to be spiritually inclined, but out of that group of 20, it would be maybe a few rather than the majority. But yes, my hope is that we connect with those women and work together to allow the sound of peace to emerge more strongly and powerfully. And I think that the other thing that I want to say very specifically is that we believe something that this young woman here said, that whatever's going on inside is what impacts the world around us. And so if each one of us here were to make a commitment to coming back to that awareness of peace and the original nature of the spirit, the soul, the essence of peace, in that awareness of peace, then yes, we would be able to contribute through our thoughts, our vibrations, our words and actions to bring peace in the world. And so I think that this gathering can have a huge impact, but also there are constantly, continually other gatherings like this happening across the world, where people are coming together to think about these ideas, share these ideas, and spread these ideas. So I think that maybe the last word, there's a vision of hope. The vision that I have is a vision that many of you share, I'm sure, and that is that this period of darkness that we're going through in the world will end, and there will be a world of light, a day, a time of peace coming very, very soon.
So with that very powerful vision, and closing the evocative debate, passionate debate we've had this evening, we also need time for silence and reflection. And so I'd like to invite Sister Genti to lead us in a guided reflection for a few minutes before we close the program. So please stay, sit comfortably and enjoy.
Now I go on in a journey in which I am alone, and I am myself. I let go of the images of the world outside, the expectations of people out there, and just connect with the sacred space within myself. And as I do this, I come to an awareness of peace. Peace intrinsic to my own inner being. It is there, but I'd forgotten, and I didn't know how to connect with it. And now I realize that simply stepping inside allows me to access this treasure of peace. And in this awareness of peace, it becomes very natural to feel the presence of the divine. I'm open those vibrations of love, and my thoughts turn to the source of light, of truth, of love. And as I connect with the divine, that which is the highest within the soul emerges. I can let go of my weaknesses and God's light and might allows the truth, the love, and the peace within my own inner being to emerge and develop to its highest potential. And in this awareness of God's light, I can see that light touching all souls in my human family. That light reaching out into the world, bringing an end to the darkness, heralding the new day. I keep my connection with this light and come back to this moment here and now, in this physical space and dimension, that now, aware of the light that I am, and emerging the highest within myself. Thank you.